So we saw earlier that generative AI is making the world a different place. But my argument was it's fundamentally a different kind of change than the changes we saw from the steam engine or the printing press or electricity or even the computer and the internet. And what is it about generative AI that makes it so much more transformational? So let's kind of think about that and see what are some of the reasons why it's having a bigger impact. I came up with 7 reasons, and we're going to talk about the first 4 of them in this part of the lesson, and then we'll talk about the other 3 in the second part. So one of the things that's important to realize is the earlier technology evolutions, like steam engine and electricity, really enhanced physical capabilities. You could haul stuff further and cheaper because you didn't have to use horsepower, you didn't have to use people power. Imagine the poor people who built the pyramids, for example. Boy, they had a lot of hard labor to do. The other thing that the earlier technology enhancements did was make communication more effective, the printing press, the internet, and the web. All of which are important things. But what's interesting about generative AI is, first of all, it's multimodal. So you can do music, art, writing, videos, coding, and many more things. And it can also create what appears to be new content, and in fact often is new content, with relatively little human guidance. You just have to know how to prompt it, and it'll do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. It's sort of like the exoskeleton for your brain. It allows you to think heavier thoughts. And this allows us to automate tasks that traditionally needed creative thinking, thereby enabling unprecedented innovation at scale. Now, again, there's all these issues of stuff like hallucinations and so on, and you certainly can't trust the output all the time. But it does do some amazing things. One of the things I think was most interesting for me, because I'm a huge Beatles fan, was the ability to use AI to lift the vocals and some of the instrumentation from one of John Lennon's great lost songs, I think it's Now and Then, and be able to make it into a hit song where the living Beatles were able to play along with their dead Beatle colleague. And that was pretty cool. That's something that really wasn't possible till very recently. Something else you can do is augment human potential. And this is the thing I think that's the most important contribution, the most important transformational thing. We sometimes think about artificial intelligence as supplanting people, replacing people, getting rid of people. And there certainly are plenty of technologies that do that. But I think what's important about generative AI is it doesn't really so much replace people as it augments them. It supplements them. It makes them more effective. And that's because it amplifies our brain power and allows us to focus on doing things that computers don't do as well yet. We were talking earlier before the class started about a new tool that's come out from OpenAI called Deep Research, which if you haven't heard of it and you're willing to spend $200 a month, you can do some really amazing things with Deep Research. It's basically like having your own personal postdoc to go out and do very, very deep analysis on whatever it is you're trying to do. I predicted in very short order, especially as the price comes down, this will radically change the way that people do research, the way people produce content, and it's going to have a very disruptive impact on a lot of different fields. What's the difference between artificial intelligence and augmented intelligence? Augmented intelligence doesn't get rid of people, it just allows them to be able to push the boundaries of what's possible and be able to solve problems better, faster, cheaper than they would have been able to do just with a pencil, paper, or internet connection and a web browser and a Google Docs implementation. So artificial intelligence tries to replace people, augmented intelligence tries to aid or augment them, and it's really all about decision support and helping people do a better job while still being able to look carefully at what the outputs are. Here are just a couple of examples from my own use of generative AI here at Vanderbilt when I was teaching classes. And if you're really curious, I have about 50 videos on my website that go through this in all kinds of great detail, either from classes I taught here where I'd come up with some cool, clever way of using generative AI. I would record a little video to show it, or from other talks I've given over time. So here's one thing I did. Since I'm recording all my lectures, I wanted to be able to find a way to automatically generate summaries of my lectures without me having to remember what I talked about for an hour or 10 minutes or however long the video was. So what I did was I used a plugin to Chrome called GLASP, G-L-A-S-P. And when you install the GLASP plugin into your Chrome browser, then any YouTube video has this little icon, and when you click on it, it throws a transcript of the video into your ChatGPT session, and then it'll summarize it. And what I would do after it summarized it, I would then go and say, please give me a 100-word summary of my video in the first person tense. and it would generate the summary. I would lightly edit it and then post it on my YouTube description box. Saved me a ton of time, and it was probably way better than I would have done anyway. Something else that I did was create tests and quizzes from the lectures I gave in class. So remember, I'm recording all my lectures. I would put them on YouTube, and then when it came time for quiz day, I would go out and I would go to my videos and I would say, throw this thing into there, summarize it, and then I would go, please come up with a multiple choice quiz question based on topic XYZ in the video. And it would generate very insightful things. And I could also tell my students, hey, go watch the videos and use the Glass plugin in order to study for the quiz. Because you could go there and you could quiz yourself. You could ask questions of this thing. And chances are they'd be similar to the ones that I would use for my quizzes. So it was a good way to get people to have this 24/7, pretty much free tutor to help them learn the material more effectively. My favorite example, though, was being able to have some grader assistance to assess programming assignments for correctness and for application of software best practices and patterns. And we actually have a paper that talks about this. For the classes I was teaching at Vanderbilt the last couple of years, we would have this very cool grading process where people would submit their first draft of their programming assignment. I would manually review all the assignments, and I would come up with a list of frequently made mistakes. We would then take the list of frequently made mistakes and give it to ChatGPT, and then tell it what the correct solutions were for the things that people were making as mistakes, and what were the mistakes. And then we wrote a tool that we called Grader, which the flowchart shows how it worked. And we would then take the programs and we would run it through ChatGPT with a private instance so it wasn't leaking the stuff to the outside world. And we would come back with very pinpoint analysis of whether the programs were updated correctly relative to my comments. And it saved us an enormous amount of time. And the nice thing about this was, first of all, generative AI was actually very accurate in analyzing and assessing. But the TA would go and make sure that the things where the points were being subtracted were in fact mistakes. So if there was a hallucination or there was something that went off the rails, we could detect it very quickly. And of course, the best thing about this was that when we turned the results back to the students, if there was still something that slipped through the AI and the tutor, the students would find it and come and complain. So it really was very fast, very automated, and almost fail-safe because there were people, augmented intelligence was looking at the steps every point along the way. Something else that's useful is democratization of skills. So nowadays, if you're willing to spend $20 a month to get the plus version of ChatGPT, and I think there's equivalent offers for Gemini and Claude and probably DeepSeek at some point, you can create very high quality content very quickly by becoming a proficient prompt engineer, someone who's able to program the large language model in natural language by using structured interactions. And prompt engineering is actually becoming its whole little discipline. In many areas, maybe not so much computer science, although I'm very bullish on computer science, but in many other fields, you no longer have to be a computer programmer whiz in order to be able to do computational thinking. You can simply use prompt engineering and prompt patterns and so on. And so I think that is actually going to be very appropriate for many people who are not computer science professionals to use computation in their work. And there's a nice little video that talks about that in more detail. Other things that are nice, it empowers individuals, small businesses. People can compete in ways they couldn't do before. There's a wonderful set of freely available MOOCs done by Professor Jules White here and someone who was the CEO of a local company called Barge Design Solutions named Bob Higgins. And they put out a couple of really cool MOOCs on generative AI for leaders and change management for generative AI, where they talk about how decision makers at companies can use these tools to brainstorm and give them new insights about how to unlock creativity and productivity in the products and services they provide. And it's really, really, really interesting. Another thing that's important, interdisciplinary impact. So the earlier technologies typically focused on specific sectors. So steam engines helped to power transportation and manufacturing. Electricity transformed industries and home life. The internet and web changed how we communicate and interact. In contrast, AI is pervasive across pretty much every field. In fact, that's what makes it so interesting. Unlike previous areas of computer science, like cyber-physical systems, where I worked for many years, not everybody cared about that. There were certain people who cared a lot, people who were doing things like military applications or aircraft or power plants or supervisory control and data acquisition systems. They cared a lot about cyber-physical systems. Everybody else could care less. Generative AI, everybody cares about it because it's disrupting pretty much every single sector. So here's just some examples of where people in business see artificial intelligence and generative AI disrupting the way in which they spend their money. And you can see it's pretty much across the board. Healthcare, there's all kinds of interesting uses of AI in healthcare. This is an interesting one, though, because we don't really want to replace doctors and nurses, especially with technologies that have a tendency to hallucinate from time to time. We want to make them more effective at decision making by giving them a wider range of options to help them think about things that maybe they didn't consider. Not every physician is an expert in everything they might encounter. So generative AI can give them some new perspectives on things that they might have missed because we're human after all. Finance, lots of work being used on using generative AI for financial trading. Entertainment, hugely disruptive. People being able to create content, modify content, and edit content, analyze content, generate articles. There's an estimation that more and more articles that you see coming out from major news sources are actually generated by AI. And of course, education, which is where we sit at the moment. So there's a really neat video by Sal Khan, who's the founder of Khan Academy, talking about how AI could save, not destroy education. And one of the points he makes, which I completely agree with because I've done it myself, is you can use large language models and generative AI as no-cost or low-cost, round-the-clock tutors to personalize the way we learn. And I'll give you a simple example. When my son was going through the AP History and AP English tests last year, I was like, hey, have you thought about using ChatGPT to help you get ready for those tests? And at first he was like, oh, Dad, they're not going to let me use that stuff when I take the test. What's the point? And I'm like, no. The point is that you can do practice tests where you write down answers to prompts that are like the ones you'll see in the actual test. And then you can give it to ChatGPT and say, please analyze my answer to this question from the perspective of a reviewer of an AP history exam. And that starts to get really powerful because you'll get kind of interesting feedback that you would not otherwise get unless you paid a very expensive tutor to sit with you 24/7, beefing up your abilities to do well on those tests. So pretty much anything that has a writing component can benefit from this. There's also a way to get wide-reaching impacts that previous innovations just couldn't match. And so that's really, in my mind, what makes this one part of the transformational aspect. And we'll talk about the other parts in a second.